Guys, good Wednesday afternoon. I'm Jerry Miller, and welcome to the I Love CVille Show. Thank you kindly for joining us. We are live in Charlottesville, across Central Virginia, the Commonwealth, the country, and the world on the I Love CVille Network, the network powered by crazy fast internet, Ting Fiber, crazy fast internet. Today's show, I've been looking forward to and frankly, excited about, since we were communicating with Dr. Holland on Facebook, and not only Dr. Holland in the house, but Dr. Jeff Vergales as well. Dr. Eliza Holland, pediatric hospitalist at UVA Children's Hospital. Dr. Vergales is a pediatrician and pediatric cardiologist at UVA. These two doctors, part of the team that led the charge behind the Urgency of Normal Toolkit, which we spotlighted a couple weeks ago. And in just 14 or 15 days since they've last been on, the climate is completely different. Now we have the governor and the Virginia Senate pushing policy forward that basically removes the previous governor's mandate. Now we have multiple school boards. In fact, during the last show, the Fluvanna County School Board referenced this Urgency of Normal Toolkit in moving forward with a empowering of parents and their kids, and whether or not they should be masked in schools. Literally reference them and their toolkit and that decision. Judah Whitcower, let's welcome them to the show and go to the three-shot. Dr. Holland and Dr. Vergales, good afternoon, guys.
Thank you for having us, Sherry.
Our pleasure, our pleasure. I'm gonna get out of your way. We'll start with an open-ended question where you guys can literally cover anything you want to start. Ladies first, Dr. Holland, the show is yours. Any topic, any theme, anything that's happened in the last 2 weeks?
A lot has happened in the last 2 weeks. First, I want to say that everything I say on this show and in public is my opinion and does not represent the opinion of my employer. Also, Jerry, I need to warn you that you may be accused of cohorting with domestic terrorists. The Department of Homeland Security has said that people who question public health orders can be considered domestic terrorists.
Which, I mean, if you think about that, that is absolutely bananas.
Yes. So I just wanted to throw that out. Maybe I should have told you before you brought us on the show.
I think you almost caught me at a loss for words, and I rarely am. Thank you, Dr. Holland. All right, so show's back to being you here. 2 weeks and change since you've last been on the program here. Policy from the General Assembly, policy from Virginia Senate, policy that's in front of Governor Glenn Youngkin. So much has changed in 2 weeks.
It really has been amazing how much has happened since the last time we were here. And when the toolkit was first published and we were getting pushback, Jeff and I talked, and I'm like, I really think that we are 2 beats ahead of the curve. And it seems like that was correct, because the toolkit came out, and then within the next week, there were editorials in the Washington Post, in the New York Times, in the San Francisco Chronicle, Time Magazine. I mean, all NPR had a piece about whether or not we should be unmasking children in schools, and these have come from various groups of doctors. The Washington Post article was 3 doctors who have not been involved with the toolkit. So there is a groundswell. There's been a tremendous amount of parent advocacy. I understand that yesterday there was a huge rally in California, parents wanting to go mask-free in schools. A number of states have said they're going to lift their mask mandates in schools. New York, California, and Washington, D.C. are lifting their indoor mask mandates. However, children and schools are not included in that lifting, and I think it makes parents really upset. I mean, why is it safe for adults to be in large gatherings, things like the Super Bowl, 70,000 people, not a mask in sight, yet Monday morning the LA school children were back in the classrooms with their mask on? And parents, and certainly the children, are seeing the hypocrisy in all of these policies and starting to ask really good questions. What's different about schools? And what I keep hearing that breaks my heart is that children are vectors of disease. And as pediatricians, we've laughed about that in the past. Having our own children and in daycare and taking care of them, we love them nonetheless. our little germ-filled children. But the way that children are being portrayed now is actually nasty. I've seen pediatricians on Facebook refer to children as cesspools of disease in really angry responses. And that message is being heard by the children, and they are starting to feel like they're internalizing this idea that they are somehow dirty and unworthy, and they're the ones that have to continue masking, and it's on them to protect the teachers and to protect the adults in their families. And that is a really, really, really heavy burden for us to put on our children.
Well said. Dr. Vergales, before we start asking some questions, and a lot of comments have come in, and those that are asking, we've shared the toolkit on all our social channels, so if you haven't seen it, it's in the comment section for you to reference. Dr. Vergales, the show is yours.
Jerry, thank you very much. And again, I represent, similar to what Eliza said, is that these are my opinions, not that of my employer, and so I want to make sure, just like I always say, that is very clear. I would say it's been a big 2 weeks, and I don't want to necessarily say, I think everybody kind of thinks that we have kind of dogs in the race. I mean, Liza and I kind of have always gone on to this, and her and I have been talking about this stuff for, a year and a half, 2 years now almost, and we've always said that the best way that we can always get through these is having more open conversations on both sides. And I think you're starting to see that. I think regardless of what some of the anger and hatred and things that have been sent to people who offer differing opinions, I think it's now deemed to some degrees okay to start having having some of those other opinions. We have a long way to come. This is a big fractured community that we have here locally in our state and our country, but the only way that we can start to overcome this is to be is to move forward with kindness and respect, and really be able to have true open discussions about where we want our country to go at this point. And I think in the last kind of 2 weeks, I think the one thing that I personally have really kind of taken from this is that we all are trying to act out of the same good faith, right? Especially in pediatrics, we're all trying to act out of the same good faith of how do we do the best job of caring for kids, and we always disagree on that, right? There's all types of disagreements we have on that in any type of issue, and there's going to be disagreements on that here, and that's okay. I think everybody has to hear that type of stuff is okay, but we have to be able to come together, and I think you're starting to see people start to come together a little more, even in the last week, to try and really find solutions that we think are tenable for everybody.
Do you think we're starting to see people come together because the cases and the numbers are dropping, because it's getting warmer, because there's fatigue, because people are now more likely to be outside even more? I mean, what do you attribute that unification to?
I think there's two things I would say. I think one, everything you just mentioned, Jerry, without a doubt, is definitely a part of it. I think as our internal angst is going to be high when cases are high. It's going to be low when cases are low. We've seen that constantly. Especially last summer is a perfect example when cases were very low. And so I think that's a huge portion of it. But I also think the fatigue is real, and we can't ignore the fatigue. And we can't. I would love nothing more than to say we can just plow on forward with every mitigation strategy, not just for COVID, but for anything. But a lot of that basically doesn't become realistic anymore. And so I think why you sometimes somewhat start seeing people come together is you have more people that were reasonably silent for a long time that are now feeling more comfortable a little bit about opening up. And I think that it's hard to pick who is the silent majority, because I think the minority of people on all aspects are always the loudest. And I think it's okay for people to start offering different opinions as they start to see that there are more people in the media. There's more people, Dr. Lena Wen's a perfect example. She has been one of the more stricter, beliefs, and she has started to ask these questions. And I think when people start to see individuals that they've thought have taken one line start to take other lines, and you're going to see this come out of the CDC even in the next couple of weeks, that's a big step forward for all of us as a kind of community to figure out how do we move forward knowing that this is where the country is headed.
What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with everything that Jeff said. I think another big turning point is Omicron has been the great equalizer. Mm-hmm. So prior to, probably even prior to Delta, you could, to some extent, avoid getting COVID through vaccines, through mitigation measures. And we've seen over the past few months that Delta and Omicron are breaking through those mitigation measures. And there are people who were very, very pro-mitigation who have gotten COVID and they've been vaccinated and thankfully had mild cases, and their children have had relatively mild cases, and it's kind of like walking through the belly of the beast. Like, here it is, the one thing that I was afraid of and I structured my life around for the past 2 years, and then they're getting to the other side of it and
Anthony
realizing
Fauci,
what it is.
he got this right? I mean, he very much said early on with the Omicron wave that it's going to be almost impossible to avoid this, and all of our mitigation has to look instead not at the ability to avoid catching COVID. He was very clear on this, but instead has to be, how do we not overrun the healthcare systems, kind of back to the original flatten the curve. And so I think I agree, it's kind of has become the great equalizer because so many people have started to see that it's hard to outrun a respiratory virus.
What do you think?
I think that's true, and I do think some of the people who are pro-mitigation measures, now it has to do more with the bureaucracy of getting COVID than actually getting COVID itself.
What does that mean?
That means that if you get COVID, you are out of work for at least 5 days. If your child gets COVID, depending on which school they go to in our health district, because not all of the schools have adopted the Blue Ridge Health Department recommendations of a 5-day isolation and then going back to school at day 6. I know Albemarle County Public Schools is still doing 10 days out after COVID. So it really then becomes a logistical nightmare. If your child gets COVID or has a significant exposure or a family member gets COVID, you're looking at days at home. My sister in Richmond has a 2.5-year-old and a 3-month-old, and she and the 3-month-old got COVID together. And her 2-year-old had to stay home with them. And it wasn't until day 7 that the 2-year-old tested positive. And by the way, she said if she hadn't been testing the kids, she would have never known they were sick. Like, they breezed through it. But so she was at home she and her husband were home for 17 days. It's 17. A lot.
That is substantial. Your thoughts on the, I described you guys on this network almost as pioneers. And often, and I'm going to catch heat for this, and I don't even care, and I'm going to say it anyway. Often, the first to market are the ones that feel the wrath of the market. And in a lot of ways, you guys were first to market with this toolkit. And you guys, I felt after doing the show, a fraction of what you guys have felt. Mm-hmm. Can you put in perspective the feelings, the stuff that you guys went through, and still the commitment to the science and the medicine and your personal beliefs that you were making the right decision here? Because I think when we reflect with the benefit of hindsight and data and time, people are going to applaud you. Mm-hmm. But in the real time, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and I would say it's probably still not fully the case. And, I like to kind of joke with my family that I've reasonably thick skin, that bodes me well. And it also means that I also have a big voice that sometimes have to figure out the right way to really kind of say things. And, there's been a lot of personal reflection over the last 2 weeks about, kind of similar to that, to understand that, while sure, I feel like we were kind of one of the first people to come out, we were not speaking for, just ourselves. I think a lot of us, that have kind of felt that we need to reevaluate some of the mitigation strategies, have felt that we're speaking for a lot of people who have told us things in confidence. I always joked, I thought about this kind of a lot in the last couple of weeks, is that, when I first started medical school, I remember the dean of med school, I went here at UVA, was a guy named Dean Garson, and he made this quote that I think a lot of other people have heard when they've started med school, to say 50% of what we are going to teach you is going to be wrong. The problem is we don't know what 50% is, right? We don't know which 50% is the wrong thing. And I think that has been really kind of key to me and kind of how we've looked at it from the pandemic, is that we have had struggles of really trying to evaluate how data has changed, right? How we look at all the mitigation strategies we did early on when there was no vaccine and there's no immunity, to how we look at mitigation strategies now when there is vaccine and immunity, has to change. How that changes, we don't really know, but we have to be okay talking about it. At least at a minimum, we have to be okay talking about it. And that's been the hardest part. I think people, as a general rule, are still just not okay talking about it because we think that it's causing a detriment to other individuals. And I would argue it's actually going to make us better if we continue to talk, because we can really then come to some sort of good middle ground and something that works for everybody as we move forward. To put this in perspective, and then Dr. Holland, your thoughts on the pioneer element of what you've done and the backlash element. To put this in perspective, Dr. Wolf is watching, and she's on the opposite side of you guys. That's safe to say. And she says, I as well, she's speaking for herself,
have literally been called a child abuser for recommending masking with children.
Yeah.
So here's Dr. Wolf saying, who's on the other side of you, saying she's also feeling the backlash.
But I think to say that Dr. Wolf is on the other side of us is not right.
On the masking.
On the masking,
specifically.
but I think that we're all coming at this from the
For the
perspective
best of kids.
that we're trying to do the best we can for children. And we all have a different perspective, right? Dr. Wolf does outpatient, I do inpatient, so I see the kids who are sick enough to come into the hospital. I also am immersed in the teen world, living it in the world of teen angst, living it through my house and what I see at camp. Dr. Vergales sees it with his cardiology patients. So, we're all, as my boss says, we're all looking at our part of the elephant, right? And, but I think that I firmly believe that we're all coming at it with the children's best interest at heart. We just all we're looking at it through our different lenses.
So we're able, Dr. Vergales, jump in here. We're able to see a heat map of where IP addresses are watching the show, and you would see so much red right now around Roosevelt and where UVA is right now. I mean, like, I'm looking at the map literally here. So Dr. Vergales, jump in here.
Eliza, that's a really important point, and I think I would, I've probably had dozens now of conversations in the last 2 weeks with people across the state. Some citizens that have reached out to me, some other doctors that have reached out to me, and who kind of have a different mindset of what I do. And they have been truly some of the most rewarding conversations that we have, because we find that we agree on the vast majority of stuff. And I think that's the thing that has really has been unfortunate to me, is I think we've been, Liz and I have been labeled as being something that we're not, because Dr. Wolf is right. Like, if you are taking a stand in something because of how tribalistic this has come, we're having so much backlash on all sides, and that's not okay. Right? That's not okay in our profession. That's not okay in our society. And if we all would just be okay talking to one another about this, I think we'd find we have much more common ground. Jerry, I will say this on your show, because I've said this to many, many people. If any one of your listeners ever want to sit down and just chat about this stuff, right? And see what each other's perspective is, I'm all in. I have had a lot of doctors say, you don't have enough time for those phone calls. I absolutely have time for those phone calls. If you want to do it in person, I will buy the coffee. I have absolutely no problem on that, because that's the only way that we come together, is if we have open conversations about it.
So Dr. Wolf follows by saying, those of us who have stood up for masks have been called such horrible things and have been so hated upon, we have given up.
So, and I am sorry to hear that.
And you got multiple people who want to sit down with you, and I'll give you your names here. But go ahead,
and they're welcome to sit down with me too. And Jeff's still buying the coffee.
Yes, agreed.
But so first off, I have only ventured onto Twitter to follow the message boards through the Urgency of Normal group, and occasionally I get off of the message and venture into Twitter. It is a horrible, horrible, hateful place.
Yes.
That might be the worst one of all of them.
It is, and when I said I'm not on Twitter, they're like, no, it's fine. It's better than Facebook. Although Facebook's gotten pretty bad too, and I think part of it, a big part of it, is the digital divide. Yeah. You can say whatever you want to someone when you are not looking them in the eye.
Totally.
And that's a problem, right? Like, you need to really measure your words and think about what you would say to that person if you were face to face. And Dr. Wolf, I am so sorry that is happening to you. On our side, we've been called eugenicists, child killers, teacher killers. I mean, it's
awful. It is an awful feeling for
racist,
both of us to have to go through this.
But I think it's important to remember that when people go to ad hominem attacks and just on your culture, or I'm sorry, not on your culture, on your personality, and attacking you personally and not your argument, or they're using these terms, it's because they don't have a good argument to what you're saying, and they can't come up with anything on their own, so they just start hurling words that they know are going to be hurtful. And obviously, if you're a pediatrician and you're called a child abuser, like, that's one of the worst things that you can be called. And it does hurt. Even if I disagree with Dr. Wolf on the masking stance, like, that breaks my heart that people are saying that to her and others who are standing up for children.
Well said. So Kelly Jackson says, I want to have a sit down with Dr. Vergales. Stephanie Lancaster, I'd like a sit down with Dr. Vergales. Carter Ricketts, I would like to sit down with Dr. Vergales. So this is
Great.
Okay.
I will
Open
find
up
a
the
way
dam.
to connect us by email, and I will be absolutely happy to chat, whether over the phone or whatnot. 100%, absolutely.
How about this question? Don't masks work best when both parties wear them? Aren't we wearing them to protect the others? If I'm sick, I wear a mask so you don't get it.
So I think this is where targeted mask wearing really comes in. I think Dr. Vergales touched on this the last time that we were here. Mask wearing 100% has a place. The way that it's being used, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in this, the way that it's being used now with this blanket mitigation measure, how much is it really doing? I mean, the children are wearing their masks, they're wearing them under their nose, around their chin, over their eyes. They're wearing the same mask for days in a row. They're wearing cloth masks. I'm not
That's
sure
our son.
that those are really good mitigation measures. If I were queen of the world, I would recommend that everyone who is concerned about their own health and their own risk wear a good quality mask, and that children or adults who don't have those same risk would at least have the courtesy of, when they are sick, wearing a mask, which is what we do. Pre-COVID, this is what we did in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
We masked to go see our patients who had respiratory viruses. We never asked those patients to mask, though. The only patients prior to COVID that we asked to mask were our tuberculosis patients. And we wear N95s, tight-fitting, that we get assessed every year, and have the patients wear a surgical mask. But never before, influenza, rhinovirus, paraflu, all of those wonderful cold viruses that can still make you sick as stink, that physicians and team would wear a mask into the room, but we never asked the patients themselves to do that. So,
And we still don't.
yeah. except for COVID. So in my ideal world, everyone who feels more comfortable wearing a mask would continue to wear a mask, and those who are ready to be mask optional, I would ask that they wear a mask if they're getting over an illness, if they're not feeling well, and see if we can stop the spread that way.
The CDC actually put out a recent paper, this was probably now about a month ago or a couple of weeks ago, that looked at this very question. And some of it was actually, some of the modeling that they did was understanding about the contagiousness of Delta and Omicron, and actually found very, very clearly, this is on their website that you can find, that the people that are wearing two surgical masks next to each other do not offer the same protection as if one person was wearing a well-fitting respirator type mask, a KN95, KF94, these types of, or an N95 type mask. Now, understand, clearly the best is if both people are wearing respirator type masks, and I think, understanding that, that probably gets you somewhere from around greater than 90% to greater than 95%. So it's really an incremental benefit. One-way masking very, very much works. And so the CDC has really kind of gotten behind this. It's also part of the problem, I think, when you look at how do you take that data and apply it to school systems, because you cannot put kids in respirator masks. There are definitely some kids that can wear it, but we do not have validated ways to be able to make sure that it fits kids of all sizes and all ages and everything like that. And it would be a very, very challenging and probably not appropriate thing to do. So a school system is a perfect example where we really need to focus on the benefits of one-way masking and how we can utilize one-way masking to protect those that are at risk.
So I'd like to jump on, but a slightly different topic, if we're talking about mask optional and what people have the opportunity to do in schools. Also, if I were queen, I would say that every teacher, every student, every parent, every administrator should respect the decision of each individual in that building. As on the website, the Urgency of Normal website, we are collecting comments and stories from people across the country, and we have gotten quite a few stories about children who are going unmasked, which is their right to do in their mask optional schools, and they are being bullied and marginalized by the students as well as by the teachers, and that is not okay. We are, like it or not, we are headed into a mask optional future. It's happening all around us. There's the bill that's in the House today, and we the adults in the room have to support every person in the building regardless of where they are.
We got multiple comments coming in here. 6 states watching, and the Las Vegas video with the kids who found out that they didn't have to
Didn't
wear.
that make you want to cry?
Kids that found out, they were told, it seemed like by a teacher, that they didn't have to wear masks. Did you see this?
I have not seen it. I'm sorry.
You have seen it.
Yeah.
I will bring this up for those that want to see the video. I've posted it in the comment section. Dr. Wolf says, "Thank you, Dr. Holland, for your kind words." So some empathy here on the show from doctors with perhaps different viewpoints on masking here. This is a fair question. Do you feel like rushing the uplifting of the mandate has contributed to the mask-related bullying that's now happening in our local schools?
Yeah, boy.
That's the politics piece.
Yeah,
It is
it's
the politics
absolutely
piece.
the politics piece. And, it's funny, I've been, told by people that, I'm personally bringing politics into this. And it's kind of funny because I feel that my politics are probably more likely the people who are telling me I'm bringing politics into it. The timing is not great, right? And I would argue without a doubt that the reason that the timing is not great is because we were so bad at it before, not because now is not the right time. And that is a big thing that I have been very critical openly about, and I will continue to be openly critical about, is that we, for the last 6 months or 9 months even, have not been honest with kids, have not been honest with the public about how we slowly can start to move to this. The lesson has always been, we'll wait and see, we'll wait and see, we'll wait and see, we'll wait and see. And while I personally am okay with we'll wait and see, and my kids are okay with wait and see, the public is not okay with we'll wait and see. And, it's such a big tenement to, public health, is that you have to meet people where they are. You have to meet people where they are. I would love nothing more than to have nobody ever smoke and nobody ever get behind the wheel, drinking and, anything. But, you cannot look at an individual person and say, you're overweight, you smoke too much, just quit it all now and walk out. You have to be able to find a way to meet them. And I think that principle applies here, is that because we were unable to really start having open conversations about degrees of stuff, and we kind of stood our ground and really stood our ground, it created this, and when all of a sudden it was upon us and the tide really started to turn, that we didn't have anywhere to turn to. And that is why I think, especially with Dr. Wolf, I will echo, I am deeply upset about hearing stuff like that, because I have gotten that too, right? And it's horrifyingly ironic that we have both gotten that, considering we're coming at it from the same belief system, but we're coming at it from a slightly different angle, and we're pissing off multiple different groups. So I think you're right, Jerry. I think the most important thing that we understand is that the timing, because it happened so quickly, and it is happening so quickly, puts people on the defense. And that's just it. We can't shame people. We can't bully kids. We can't shame individuals. We're better than that.
Yeah, I agree. I do think politics play into this, unfortunately. We are so tribalized. And I was talking to someone recently who just got over COVID. And I'm like, that's so great. You've got a window, right? And she said, I still don't feel comfortable not wearing my mask to the store, even though I know I'm not going to give it to anyone. I'm not going to get it. She's like, because I don't want people to look at me and think that I voted for Trump. And I have to say, I've not worn a mask in a store in months, and I still feel a little sheepish when I'm at Trader Joe's, and I want to be like, but look, I brought my own bags. Does that get me any cred? I didn't vote for Trump. I feel comfortable not masking because I looked at my own risk assessment and the risk within my family, and I'm doing it. But I feel that it is that silent judging. And unfortunately, masking has become it's become kind of the most visible part of pandemic mitigation measures. And there's a lot of virtue signaling that comes with it, right? And this started in the beginning when it got so politicized. And again, if you look at where they're the strictest mitigation measures and there's still masks in place, they're areas that are largely blue, very liberal, very highly vaccinated. I mean, communities that should feel good about going mask optional, but it's so this is it. We're planting our flag in this
Charlottesville
ground.
and Albemarle County are exactly what you just said.
Not out where I live.
I mean, okay. Well, Charlottesville and Albemarle County from an urban ring standpoint.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, very much meet the demographics or the KPIs you just indicated there. A lot is coming in here, so I'm going to try to keep pace and tempo. 33 minutes in to about an hour interview. many moms, including the mom of our son, my wonderful wife, was demoralized with the Pfizer vaccine for kids being delayed. We almost had this like, and this is just like a dad talking here to a dad and a mom. We had this like almost like hope for parents of littles that this vax was around potentially the corner, and certainly my wife, and that was almost like something that she could, I don't want to say latch onto, but it was like a fuel to help get through these tough January aspects of this pandemic. And January was brutal. Okay, so now, and I see you're itching to jump in here, Dr. Holland.
I'm curious what Dr. Vergales has to say, but I have strong feelings about this. First off, I wouldn't be demoralized because it means, to me,
more study, more data, more research.
More study, more data, so the emergency use authorization for the older people, slam dunk, right? Like the risk of the vaccine, any risk of the vaccine was far, far, far outweighed by benefit to that age group.
Right.
And it goes down. Children, unvaccinated children, are still at much, much less risk of
I had this conversation,
and
literally everything that you've said, but then I was seen, and this is just in the house, as being insensitive and not prioritizing our son, and I'm not trying to get into family dynamics here.
No, but it's
on the show.
And I don't, like, the risk to an unvaccinated child your son's age is so exceptionally low. Like, more likely to be in a car accident.
Right.
It's this idea of that you can control. More likely to have an accident. More likely, there's other things. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought thinking about how to argue this. But there's being a kid is fantastic, but there are all sorts of ways that you can get hurt or end up in the hospital being a kid. And COVID is really, really low on that list. And the great news is if your son gets COVID prior to a vaccine being available, is it looks like the infection-acquired immunity is really good and durable. So this is how children work their immune systems up from time immortal.
Right.
You get these viruses when you're young. Your body is, because you have this young, healthy body, for the most part, and I realize that I'm not speaking for every child, but in the vast majority of healthy children, they get these common cold viruses, and they have their immune response, and they build up their antibodies and their long-term immune responses, and then the next time they see it, it's more mild.
I think I outlined it, not nearly as good as you did, but pretty much every point, and still it was met with some resistance there. So why don't we just go open-ended with Dr. Vergales here. The media, the mainstream media exploited that headline.
Very much so.
And created fear to drive metrics with that headline. I'm going to take a slightly different, not approach, because I actually very much agree with everything Liza said, but I'm going to take a slightly different kind of perspective on this. My heart absolutely breaks for the parents that are under 5 that have been waiting for this vaccine. Absolutely breaks for them, because I think what the FDA, and probably more importantly what the CDC did, was a colossal failure, right? The CDC came out with following the headlines that the FDA was asking for this, and very much said, we're going to be ready to ship those doses come February 21st, right? Like they said, we're ready. Like they implanted this, feeling that like it's ready to go in a very vulnerable population, right? The reason that I say that I'm going to take it from a slightly different perspective is I think there's the aspect of the personal level, what you kind of have at your house and what a lot of people in our community, are dealing with, right? Which is just waiting for that vaccine for the under 5. And that cuts so deep. These are the same people like my wife that we are first in line for the flu shot every year when it's available. My kids are going to get Gardasil, the HPV vaccine as soon as they're able, right? Like this is my family's risk-benefit profile, and so they are going to be first in line. As were my kids; they wanted to be one of the first in lines to get the vaccine when it was made available for 5 to 11. The problem is that the FDA got it right. It was not ready.
And it was definitely not ready. And it is very clear as it came about why it was not ready is that they were going to sow much more public discourse in the vaccine if we approved something that was almost half-baked, right? That the trial had not shown that it had generated the immune response. And more importantly, they didn't have enough COVID among kids that were in the trial in order to be able to make any sentiment about what the effectiveness is. That's okay to some degree because they were doing what's called an immunobridging type study. I won't get into the details of what that is, but it was a really, really important step that the FDA looked at the data and said, not yet. And again, my heart absolutely breaks. But let's take the bigger picture, which is where I think Dr. Holland is getting at, is that this has to be back on us as doctors to frame the risks to those kids, right? And to frame the risks to those patients. That doesn't mean that we should not be highly encouraging them to get vaccinated when it's available. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing any of that. But the truth of the matter is that the public is not behind this vaccine, right? When it comes to the young age range. The Kaiser Family Foundation put out a poll before 5 to 11s came out that said that about 30% of these parents want to get the vaccine. Another 30 may wait and see, and another 30 will say absolutely not. They hit the nail on the head, right? In Virginia, only 40% of people have gotten the 5 to 11. That's what that number is. We're not going to be able to get that number to 90. Kaiser Family Foundation did the same exact thing for the under 5 vaccine. 25% of families are willing to get the vaccine for under 5. And there's a lot of reasons that I think that is, some of it being the political nature of it, some of it being the fact that a lot of parents have seen their kids get COVID and recover. But we have to understand that when it comes to the population, we're catering to a small group, a very important small group, but that can't necessarily dictate how we deal with public policy.
Do you want to add to that? And I'll read, and before perhaps, I'd like to read a portion of the statement from Pediatric and Associates of Charlottesville. This was shortly after you guys coming on the show, and then Dr. Wolf coming on the show. And full disclosure, our son goes to Pediatric Associates of Charlottesville downtown, and they're amazing.
Yes.
Dr. Wolf, your team, your practice, Casey, the nurse practitioner that sees our son, you guys are amazing, amazing. We love you guys. Please, one of the sentences in the statements, and I'm reading it verbatim, we do not consider COVID-19 as mild in kids after 1,000 U.S. children have died from COVID-19 per CDC data thus far. That was February 6th.
Right.
So it just like, I'm just a dad. My wife is just a mom. Like we are not like, we're not experts. We get what we get from our doctor, from you guys, from the media. And like there's just this like, difference in perspective, and then like often, and I'm just trying to like humanize this for everybody, and you guys are totally are empathetic to this, is like we're confused.
Yeah. So I want to put the deaths in perspective. Like we never are happy to hear that a child died for any reason, right? Like this is serious. And again, in the vast majority of children, COVID is a mild illness. But occasionally viruses do kill children for a variety of reasons. And we know some of the risk profile for children who are more vulnerable, and it's the same children who are more vulnerable to the flu or to rhinovirus or to RSV. They have underlying health issues. The numbers are hard, right? So there's actually two different numbers on the CDC website. There's the CDC tracker that has a number over 1,200, and then the CDC National Center for Health Statistics has a number of 796. So that is, I wrote all this down because I want to keep it, it's a 39% difference. And that changes the risk. Again, no deaths are good, but that's a pretty significant change in the number of deaths. There was also an MMWR that came out in April of 2021 that looked at death certificates of people who had passed from COVID. And in the under 18 age group, 35% had another diagnosis on their death certificate that could not be in any way linked to COVID. So it is, by CDC's own records in April, 35% of those deaths, while they did have COVID, they couldn't say the
directly correlated.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the same goes for hospitalizations.
Well, why is that? What is the disconnect?
Because
is that media manipulation and exploitation, or is that like hospitals. I mean, the other like storyline is like the hospitals are trying to call it COVID for funding. I mean, there's so many storylines.
I don't know about that. So what
I can respond to that.
You
real
say
quick.
absolutely no to that.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely not true.
But you've heard that though.
Oh, for sure.
For sure, yeah. There was the CMS, the Center for Medicaid Services, would give patients or would give hospitals slightly more money for the COVID diagnosis during the reimbursement, but that was to make up for the massive loss and what the mitigation strategies were doing, to make up for the fact that we were spending a lot more money on those patients. It was doctors are not getting paid to say if a patient had COVID.
Right.
That is not happening.
We are testing for COVID. We are testing every single patient who walks in the hospital doors for COVID. So we are picking up a lot of incidental cases. And I will say a couple of weeks ago, I know of at least 12 pediatric patients who were in the hospital under the COVID banner. Easily 50% of them were there for something else. There was an overdose, there was a broken leg, there were babies who were staying longer for just complicated courses that were totally unrelated to COVID, but their moms were COVID positive. These are children who would have been in the hospital regardless of whether or not their test had been positive for COVID. So I think we need to take all of that into account when we're looking at the numbers. I also, to putting the death in perspective, 1,500 children were shot and killed last year. So there were still far more children who were shot and killed under the age of 17 than there have been children who have died throughout this pandemic. And we don't think about that often in Charlottesville because we don't have a community, thankfully, where that happens often. But if you're looking at across the U.S. and childhood deaths, homicide, intentional or intentional, is a significant player.
Anything you want to add to this, Dr. Vergales?
No, I think, I'm such a data nerd, right? Like, I mean, this is what all my advanced degrees are in. And so I would say looking at absolute numbers of childhood death is really, really challenging. And it comes with big confidence intervals that you have to say about what you think is being attributed to COVID as opposed to what is occurring with COVID. And I know that's a political hot button topic about saying with or because of. And so I'm not going to get too much into that. But I think the understanding is that when we still look at what the denominator is of how many kids have gotten COVID and how many have gotten sick, it still is in that overall population a mild illness. And we have gotten much better at knowing who are the kids that are most likely to get sick. We are not perfect at predicting them, right? Every year I deal with a kid with a random viral illness that develops significant problems with their heart for reasons I cannot say. And with COVID, that's happened in UVA hospital as well, that we've had kids that have had that problem we can't understand. I don't think any of us have said that we've had more or appreciable amounts more. But it's just the numbers are hard to wrap your head around, and that makes it really challenging.
So Carol Thorpe of the Jack Jewett District, she often makes the show better, says, and I'm going to read a portion of this comment, Carol Thorpe, it was excellent. The science proves, as eloquently stated by Dr. Holland, that the risk of contracting and then possibly dying from or with COVID-19 is rare. Furthermore, 1,000 child deaths is tragic, but in a nation of 320 million people, deaths from most anything will sadly happen. And that's from Carol Thorpe right there. The hashtag that quickly sprung up, and we touched on this last time, after urgency of normal hashtag was urgency of equity hashtag. And you were seeing that on Twitter almost as viral as urgency of normal, that hashtag. You want to offer anywhere you want to go on the urgency of equity topic here? Because I think that was a lot of the main resistance that was coming your way.
Yeah, this, and I'll be honest with you, and I'll say this very openly. This was one of the ones that was really deeply personal to me. That this was the thing that got, and let me back up because I've been very clear with all the work that I've done locally in the community, and been just so fortunate to be a part of the UVA outreach team, to be a part of the Blue Ridge Health outreach team. I think I've been one of the only people that has my fingers, I think, in all pots, with the schools and all their outreach teams. And if you ask anybody that I've worked with, every single thing that I have done has been to affect the marginalized people in our community, right? Like, my kids are fine. When schools closed, I was able to hire someone to teach my kids. The issue that we had said is that when we started to try and roll things back, it was all with the understanding that this entire pandemic, from our mitigation strategies to our healthcare system to everything, has not done a good job of being equitable. right? Like none of it has been equitable, right? We see that very, very clearly in some of the outcomes for communities of color, for people with less means. We've seen this time and time again. When we first started to say that we needed to open schools, that was all because we knew that what population was going to hurt most by closing schools. And that proved to be true, right? I had kids out just ad nauseum when I was seeing them in clinic that I knew were being left home alone, way underage, that were being left home alone because their parents had to work. When we saw that the 14-day quarantine was no longer necessary and the VDH had come out and said that a 10-day quarantine provided the same thing, that was a decision that was supported by Blue Ridge Health, I advocated strongly that we needed to go to 10 days because that's a week of work for a family that needs to be able to work when it wasn't changing anything about COVID mitigation. It wasn't changing anything. We had the data to prove that. And that was where the belief and why we ended up doing this is saying we need to normalize the mitigation strategies and reduce the effect that that's having on kids. When we noticed that the kids that were being grown up from quarantine were much more likely to have to ride a school bus, we knew that cut incredibly deep into all of this. Everything about this pandemic has been, has had issues with how we deal with equity, especially, and we have seen this very, very specifically in our community. And that has been my 100% motivation behind any of this that we do. This is not just about allowing privileged children to be able to do what they want, right? This is about making sure that we understand how we frame risk necessary so that we stop making a kid sit at home for 2 weeks while their family is sitting, is unable to go to work. And I think it would be fine if I knew that things like masking and the policies that we were doing were making a noticeable difference on the health of our community, but we started seeing that long ago that we weren't. And so I was deeply hurt by the fact that this is where some people decided to say that this is actually, that I am against equity by trying to make this position, because every other decision that I have been a part of, everything that we have done, for the last 2 years with this pandemic locally in this community has been exactly the opposite.
Dr. Holland, well said. Dr. Vergales.
So I agree 100% with what Jeff said. I also want to bring up some points, like the mandated masking in school has hurt children who are English language learners.
Yeah.
Children who need special therapies. So I've heard from parents whose children are in speech therapy and they're not getting adequate services because they have to be masked. And the children whose families are wealthy can afford to pay for private therapists to come to their home who will do therapies with them unmasked. But so this push to go mask optional in the schools does have the potential to even that playing field, especially for those families whose only opportunity for services are through the public schools. In addition, look at what LA is doing. They are anticipating that they're going to put 15,000 children online next year because they are not going to comply with the vaccine mandate to come back into the school building. We already know that for a large number of children, online learning was an abysmal failure. And absolutely, everyone knows a child who did much better. Their social anxiety was better. They felt like it was easier to engage with their classmates online. So yes, I do understand that there is a small percentage of children for whom online learning was actually a benefit. But I think if you look by and large, online learning was an abject failure for most of our children. And who's going to be put online are the children whose parents either are uncomfortable vaccinating them or are not able to take the time off of work to get them vaccinated. And so we're going to stretch that divide.
You're going to widen the educational gap.
Yes, even further.
No doubt.
So much about what I think we've talked about for anything is we understand that our school system, even in this country, is just not perfect, right? We need to continue to try and figure out ways that we can deal with the equity issue within our school system. And nowhere is that truer in Charlottesville and Albemarle County that have really spent a lot of time focusing on this in the last couple of years, even before the pandemic. We have to let them be able to do that job normally. right? We have to let them be able to do that job normally. And I think if we had this is such a complicated topic because you want to balance the fact that we know that our mitigation strategies are hurting certain groups of people. And we also have fear that, well, if we relax our mitigation strategies, is it going to come down harder from an illness standpoint? And I strongly believe that that second part is no longer proving to be true. But that first part is proving to be true. And so whereas a year and a half ago, a lot of this stuff kind of made sense, we've got to get our head around how we deal with the equity issue of this entire pandemic. This has shown that our healthcare system is without a doubt broken when it comes to that population, and that we need to double down and refocus our efforts on exactly how we help that population and stop focusing on things that we think may have potentially marginal benefit.
Can we consider the trust aspect with healthcare? I felt like we already were at a time before the pandemic where the trust with healthcare, certainly with the population we're talking about now, was perhaps eroded or not as strong as it once was. My fear, and you guys are the experts, just the guy with the microphone and a following here, my fear is the trust, once this pandemic is done, is going to be eroded even more. I mean, we got like, what's the show on Hulu, Dope Sick, with Michael Keaton, that's showcasing the opiate crisis and how it was created by Big Pharma to make money. And we had trust issues when it comes to insurance, when it comes to marginalized communities who are not resourced, not getting the health care of resource communities. And now this, like, have you guys considered like the and I know you have, because you guys consider everything, but like the multi-layers to this from like almost like a sociology standpoint of this?
Yes, I think there are going to be entire graduate programs that are going to be based around our response to COVID, and looking at every single aspect of it and what we got right and what we got wrong. And already, obviously, the Monday morning quarterbacking has begun. But I am really worried about the overall lack of trust in the public health system. And I say that as someone who is very, very critical of public health messaging. I'm critical of it myself. I've been vocally critical of it. It has not been as transparent and nuanced as it needs to be. I am afraid that the politicalization of vaccines is going to increase vaccine hesitancy for vaccines that we really need to get into children's arms. There are diseases out there that will kill them without a doubt, and they can spread and make other people very ill. And I think it's really important that we try not to let people's distrust in the COVID vaccine bleed over into other childhood vaccines and routine childhood maintenance. I think this has torn the top off of our education system, and looking at all of the problems in the education system, it has highlighted for sure the mental health issue that was already going on in our teenagers and has just been exacerbated over the past 2 years. Like, there are so many places that we can go with this.
Everything that's wrong with social media, it's highlighted.
Yes.
I mean, which is the foundation of your words, the tribalism that's occurring, the social media, where people have these quote unquote keyboard muscles to do stuff on social that they would never do face to face to somebody. Everything you just said, I 1,000% agree with you. What are your thoughts on this distrust element?
Same exact thing, Jerry. I think you hit the nail on the head. My panic and my fear throughout all of this is that we are putting all of our eggs in one basket, that we're willing to lose all the other baskets. And I've seen this. I mean, the amount of patients that I have, I serve patients in a huge region, right? So I don't just see Charlottesville, Albemarle patients. I see them from all over. And that's not a critique of anyone who just sees Charlottesville, Albemarle, but I tend to get a lot of different patients from a lot of different walks of life. And it is amazing. I have never heard some of the distrust that I've had about just decisions that I'm bringing up on not even COVID related or questions when I talk to them. I mean, I would never have feared asking somebody about whether or not they got their COVID vaccine or their flu vaccine or their any vaccine. And when I have a patient from Southwest Virginia that's coming that I really think is a good, like, this child needs their COVID vaccine, he is marginal, there's a little bit of fear in me in bringing that up. And I think that's because we have such eroded. Now, I'll offer a silver lining out of this. I'll offer just a little bit of a positive thing, is I think where most of the public discourse has been is in public health messaging and the CDC. CDC. I think the CDC is going to have a world of repair to do to their image. You know,
they have to revamp it all.
The whole thing. I think they're going to have a world of repair to do.
This is like a branding thing.
But you know what? Yeah. But you know what people still listen to? Their doctors.
Definitely.
Right? You know, and they listen to Dr. Wolf and the great docs at Peds Associates, and they listen to Dr. Holland when they're in the hospital who are saying things, and they listen, you know, to me when they're coming and saying things. And we all need to be honest and truthful and continue to engender their trust. And if there's any group that can do that, it's us, right? You know, that we can sit down, and that's a lot of the big argument of the work that Liza and I have been talking about is that we have to get all of this messaging out of the public sphere and back to where it belongs in the doctor's office, right? Because the public sphere part is done, right? We got vaccines out and we got, you know, a year and a half of it. Let us take over a little bit to start to restore some of that trust because, you know, patients will still listen to their trusted medical source, and I do strongly believe that is still true.
What did you make? Do you have something to add?
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say it's not just us, the primary care doctors. My husband is an interventional pain physician, and he has conversations one-on-one with his patients who he knows are at high risk, and he's gotten some of them to get the vaccine. Because he's been able to have that conversation. And I 100% agree. Those conversations about vaccinating, whether it's vaccinating the adults in the house, getting the children vaccinated, those belong in the doctor's offices where they have those personal relationships and they know how to make those connections.
What did you think of the news that was on all over the national outlets this morning that Moderna's CEO says it's reasonable to think the pandemic may be in its final stages? Here's the guy that's the CEO of the vaccination company that's saying that the pandemic is in its final stages. I mean, of anybody saying this, I found that to be like the most hopeful, because this guy monetizes the vaccine or monetizes the pandemic.
I couldn't read it. It was behind a paywall.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet either. But I will say, I think it's an interesting point that I think the term pandemic as a general rule has also taken on a little bit of a political and kind of sociological term. And, you know, the definition of pandemic is not that fascinating, right? It's where, you know, it's obviously affecting across a large swath equally. You need to take a broad approach to it. These are kind of the basic definitions of pandemic. And I have kind of said the aspects that the pandemic has been over for a while, because I think for some reason what we need to do is we need to be looking at individual communities, individual pockets, individual settings, you know, to be able to start applying that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that disease is over.
Are you using endemic then?
Yeah, I will, you know, probably skirt that question a little bit, because I don't think I am smart enough in the epidemiological world to kind of understand that. But I think if you could kind of dumb it down for me as a cardiologist, I would very much say is that I do not believe the broad brush is going to get us to the next steps. I think, you know, I have made the argument now that we really, really need to be focusing on the groups that we're concerned about. And that is not a pandemic thought process, that is an endemic thought process. But I am not important enough to know when that shift is made.
What about the comment? What about the fear? I guess fear is the right word, or the trend, or the conversation that there's always going to be this new variant, and it's just, it is what it is. I mean, so
no one can predict the future, right? And maybe I'm a little too Pollyanna, but we as a family had went through a lot of stuff in the fall, and I made a decision as the head of the family that we could give the bad stuff a little bit of time every day, but that was it, right? Because there are so many beautiful, amazing, fabulous things that are happening in the world around us every single day. And to sit around and worry about what might come is really not a great use of anyone's time or mental resources. Like, we are coming into spring, you know, we're halfway through February. We're coming to spring in Charlottesville, which is like the most glorious time of the year here. And our children are growing up, and they are still like full of wonder and amazement and joy. And I just feel like we have to take everything on a day-by-day basis, and we can give 5 minutes of worry to what might come next, but we really need to focus on the amazing things that are going on around us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We,
Me too.
The same thing in our house
Well said.
is that, you know, we have to we have to move on mentally in our in my world. That doesn't mean that we're not, we were reckless with other people's beliefs and stuff, but in our own house, I want to talk more about like what they're looking forward to next week as opposed to talking about what new variant is coming down the pipeline. You know who does need to be thinking about that is our public health institutions, right? Because we were horrifyingly and still horrifyingly unprepared to be able to handle this and whatever strategy you want to do. And I think a big portion of that is even how we handle messaging and mental nature of that and how we context and should we be quicker to pivot and whatnot. I have a lot of fear when people start talking about the new variants. They say, that's a reasonable fear to be concerned that a new virus is going to come, whatever, even if a variant
But we should also be scared about crossing the road and getting hit by a car.
Exactly, right? There's a lot of things that people need to be scared about, but the fact of the matter is that's not how we live our lives.
Yes.
And so, what is important to understand is that as a public health institution, if we're not very comfortable talking about getting rid of a mitigation strategy, how much do you think it's going to help when we have to start talking about bringing it back? Right? How it would be like, could you imagine right now if all of a sudden, 6 months later, like we're not using masks and quarantines and everything, and all of a sudden the CDC came out and said, we got to start doing it again? Could you imagine what would happen? It would be pandemonium, right? And I think that's a lot on us is because we were so unwilling to talk about it early on, or be quicker to say, cases are down. Like this summer, cases are down. People stop using masks. Cases are down. Because when they go back up, maybe we have to use them again, or maybe we have to use some of these strategies again. We've dug ourselves a hole, and that doesn't affect how each of us lives our life, but it definitely is, putting public health institutions on notice that we were horrifyingly unprepared for this, and we need to come at and reset that strategy, without a doubt.
So a lot of questions coming in, and we're 64 minutes in, so I'm going to try to pick up the tempo just a little bit here and try to get to as many as possible. How about Denmark? KJ, I'm getting to your questions here. How do you feel about the Denmark COVID data? They took away the precautions and numbers are skyrocketing.
Numbers are going up. Tracy Hogue had a great thread about this. But I think they're not seeing a lot of severe disease. I mean, they feel comfortable with what they're doing is my understanding.
I know this very crucially because I haven't delved into Denmark, but you very much know that Denmark Ministry of Health came out with a statement in the last couple of days that basically said how our data is being reported out in social media is incorrect, and that we are doing just fine right now. And so they've been on the proactive. I will say that's probably all I know.
And they did have, someone had posted a very impressive graph of deaths in Denmark, and when you look at it close up, it's huge spikes. It's like from 5 to 25. I mean, we didn't go from 5 to 2,500. So it's, you got to pan out and look at the big picture. And absolutely, case numbers are going to go up. And my guess is what the CDC is going to say next week, and I very well may be wrong, is it's time to start focusing more on severe disease and hospitalizations than on absolute case numbers.
Well, that news came out 45 minutes ago.
Oh.
And that's literally what the news is saying. How do you say her last name? Dr. Rochelle Walensky said the CDC is focusing more on hospitalizations as the guide to whether public health measures should be lifted.
Yes.
39 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I very much am in favor of that. I think that's a better metric to some degree to wrap our heads around because case numbers has become almost inaccurate with the amount of home tests and things like that.
She adds that the CDC is reviewing its mask guidance and may soon issue an update for everyone. So what you're saying, so how about this one as we wind down? So we had the mayor of Charlottesville on the show, and I asked him about, he's in the middle, along with council, of a really precarious position, and it's this budget. And they're considering school reconfiguration of Buford, where they need $75 million to reconfigure one school, and then another $25 million to reconfigure Walker. And it's going to take 5 or 6 years for the first one, 10 years for Walker. So how they're going to find that money is to increase the real estate tax rate, 10 cents, when assessments already went up 12%. So it's essentially gentrifying the community, these tax burdens. So he's in this position. If I increase the tax rate like this, the kids that will benefit from school reconfiguration aren't the kids we're trying to serve today. the under-resourced, impoverished kids. It's going to end up being wealthy kids that benefit from that can afford their families the tax rate increases. So he has to he was considering, or I asked him, how do you look at this decision and this precarious position you're in as it impacts your legacy? So I'm going to ask a similar question for you guys. 2.5 weeks ago when you guys came on the show, and I felt the backlash, so you guys really must have felt the backlash. You guys were essentially tarred and feathered. Right? You were tarred and feathered. And now, 2.5 weeks later, it's seeming well, guess what? You're probably right. Or you're heading in that right direction. Have you considered of how your legacy will be considered a year from now, or at the end of this year, or a few years from now? Do you think about that at all? You do not think about that at all?
I mean, I like to think in the end I've always acted from a high ground with kindness and respect to everybody else. And I like to think that deep down in my head, which I truly believe, and heart, that I have done this not for my children who have been fine, but for all the kids in this area, right? It doesn't matter what their walk of life is. And if that's not good enough for my legacy, then I have to own that, right? But, I didn't do this to come on your show, right? I didn't do this to, have newspaper articles written about me or things like that, or to make enemies, right? I did this because it felt like from afar, this is something that I could help with. And at the end of the day, I am, without a doubt, always going to sleep well knowing that it came from a good place, and that I will always treat everybody, doesn't matter if you agree with me or not agree with me, with the same respect that I ask you to treat me with. And I think that will always make us better.
Same one for you. That was well said.
Yeah. I think as pediatricians, our natural inclination is to advocate for children where we see that they are being left behind or harmed in some way. And from the school closures and now the impacts on masking, that's where I see the harm, and that's where I've put my efforts. I don't know, it's why we became pediatricians, because we love kids and we want to help them be the best, healthiest versions of themselves that they can be.
Whenever you put yourself in the public sphere, you're going to get some backlash, right?
Definitely.
From the mayor's standpoint and everything like that. And, I think it's back to my hope and back to my offer to any of your listeners, right? Again, is that, I think once you start to really actually have discussions with individuals, you realize, and maybe this is a good lesson for politics as well, right? You realize, we actually agree on a lot more than we think we disagree on. And you get each other's individual perspectives, and you end up in a better spot. And, we're always stronger together. We're always going to be stronger together. And if there's something that we can learn, and if my legacy has to take a hit, to understand that at the back end of this, that we realize we're always going to be stronger together, then so be it.
I think we're going to look back, and this is me saying this, we're going to look back as you guys as being pioneers and the initial authors of the toolkit. And we're going to, with the benefit of hindsight, say, you know what, maybe we responded the wrong way. I think that's how the community is going to respond.
I hope, but I also do feel for people when they're feeling very vulnerable right now, and know that I will always support you.
I'll throw out just a couple of details to finish with the interview, and you guys are awesome. I appreciate the time. How has the toolkit, multiple people are asking, evolved? Or will the toolkit continue to evolve?
It will. So this is an active document. There have already been some addendums that have been made, and a new version should be hitting the website later this week. We've had a lot of exciting new authors join in. We have several Canadian physicians, so whatever we're going through in America, they're also going through in Canada. We just got the news that Alberta lifted their mask mandate for the under 12 crowd earlier this week, which is really exciting. There is a infectious disease physician from the UK who is coming on as an author and collaborator. So all of that is really exciting to get these perspectives from all over the world. We have a child psychiatrist from Baltimore who works predominantly in inner city and low-income populations. We have a couple of other psychiatrists. The collaborator list is expanding, and new information as it comes in, and we feel like it's going to be helpful for families.
Why don't we close on this for you, Dr. Holland? What'd you make of the and I shared the video, the Las Vegas video with the kids in the classroom when they found out they didn't have to wear the mask.
Oh my gosh, I almost cried. Like I know a lot of people say that kids don't mind masking, and this could be a whole nother 10-minute topic, but I think most of them, given the choice of going to school and seeing their friends' faces and their teachers' faces, would much prefer that. And the just pure joy in those children when they heard the news was unbelievable.
You guys, thank you. I'm sincerely grateful of the time. Anything we want to add or close with? I felt like we covered everything.
Yeah, I think so.
We covered a lot.
Thank you, Jerry. It's
Thank
always
you so much.
always good to have open discussions.
Absolutely.
Always important.
Dr. Vergales may have a few coffee solicitations.
Perfect. I will reach out to these individuals, and I will be absolutely happy to.
Some white mocha chocolate lattes or whatever they're called on the horizon for the doctors. Dr. Vergales, guys, and Dr. Holland, thank you so much.
Absolutely, my
Truly
pleasure.
grateful for the time. So this is the this is the Wednesday edition of the I Love CVille Show. And it's long-form content that cannot be taken out of context. And I think that's why a lot of our guests come on the program. It just offers background on everything that's been said, as opposed to sound bites that can be manipulated. The program airs Monday through Friday, 12:30 to 1:30 here on the I Love CVille Network. And Judah Whitcower is our compass, our foundation for the technology, guys. Thank you for joining us. We will see you guys tomorrow. Take care. He's going to let us know.